Twitter taken care of. Let's get our dashboard and bot in here. I think we're good there. And finally, let's get the Discord posted. Give me a second if I could actually copy, but I can't. I'm terrible at this. You'd think that after after a year or two, I would have gotten good at this. All right. So, hello everyone. This is Chris Ingerson, and it is February 19th, and this is the February 19th technically text quest dev stream, although we are going to be focusing on code today. Which, speaking of, I should probably walk on screen, and I should probably put the giant coding block up, because that's going to be what we mostly focus on today. So, for this, if you tuned into last week's dev stream, you'll know that we were reworking our JSON parser so that we can actually have much more performant JSON parsing. Currently, we have a burp. Ugh. Currently, we have a functional JSON parser, but it is very painful to use it for large blobs of JSON. Specifically, the areas that we are having issues are runtime parsing for custom adventure games. And that is because the amount of JSON being read in there is truly staggering. It's all the JSON for every object in the game, in addition to every room in the game, in addition to every setting that the game has. So it's a pretty beefy amount of code. So what I need to do is I need to create a process for the JSON parser that can basically either take place over time or can just be so optimized that it's instant. Probably it's going to end up being the former. I would be surprised if I can do it for the latter, which means that today we're going to be delving into threading. And we might start off just trying to get a basic parsing function working, since I haven't actually finished that part yet. But we do have everything else functioning. Currently, if I were to just go ahead and jump in here, we can test an object real quick, and you'll see that we have basically the data structures working. So it recognizes bools, it recognizes strings, it recognizes ints, and it recognizes floats. Although I guess that's replacing it. I should probably change that slightly so that it's not quite as easy. So I'll make that like 200.1, just so that's a little easier. And we do have it doing a bunch of things like validating strings against strings, and basically letting us set values based on just immediate immediate primitive value types. So we can say like this JSON value is equal to false. And I won't have to say like is equal to a new JSON bool, false, whatever. I can just shorthand it. So you can see that we do have bools, strings, ints, and floats working. If we were to change this to be the array test, you'd see that we have arrays functioning as well. And all of that is, of course, working with appropriate indentation without any extra spacing. So if we turn off pretty print and we hit, I think it might be 0. There we go. Ooh. That's a good. Oh no, 0 is something else. Great, I've forgotten what my own freaking test button is. Let's go down here. Update labels, alpha 0, alpha 1, and then just data test. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, so I want to call data test. So that's keypad 9. So I want to do that. So that's with pretty print. If we turn that off and we hit 9, that's what that looks like. This wrapping is not a new line problem. This is just because it's trying to wrap the string to fit in here. So it looks a little weird, but it is correct. If we were to go over here to the output, you would see that it is actually correct. Ooh. Again, I'm assuming that's because of a wrapping thing. So, so that should be correct. So we do have it working in the sense that the data structures actually do handle data that's fed into them correctly, and they will parse out to the correct string value. But now we need to get the actual parsing set up. And to do that, we're just going to go over here to JSON Parser. We have to kind of handle a lot of different things. the way that I've done it in the past, and probably the way we're going to try to do it again, is to go through character by character and basically build the data one thing at a time. That is admittedly a cumbersome process, but it is one that is, well, it's functional. It's probably one of the reasons why my previous parser was a little slower, but admittedly, I'm not really sure of a faster way to parse JSON than to literally just parse the JSON. Um, because there is no built-in system class for handling JSON. There is for XML, but there isn't for JSON. And one of the problems there for JSON is that you have to be aware of nested objects. So you can't do, it's not going to be as simple as, say, like if I come back here, like I couldn't simply, if I wanted to parse this array, I couldn't simply say like, give me, well, if I want to know what this array contains, then I would say like, go from open brace to, open bracket to close bracket. But you can see here that we have another array inside of this array, which would mean that it would prematurely detect that, and then it would basically break because that's not valid JSON. So what we have to do is we basically have to keep track of these special characters as they are used, and make sure that we have an equal number of open and closed braces before we, declare a particular section of a string to be the string for a JSON value. So that's not really great. There is not a ton that I can do there really to get around that, I feel. So we're going to try to basically kind of like put this code together as fast as possible. It's not hard code. It is very cumbersome code, though. So we're going to go ahead and say JSON object. JSON is equal to new JSON object. And then we're going to return JSON down here. Okay. Now, for the rest of this, we're going to go ahead and say, this is where it's going to get fun. Trying to think of the best way to structure this. So ideally what I would like to do is I would like to have an outside in approach where basically I try to grab the outermost string or the outermost string value. So start with an object. That means we start with the braces, we strip those away, and then we go through and parse things as we see them. So that, let me think how I want to handle that. So that's going to require us to basically do this, I guess. Oh man, will that work? Probably. So I can kind of cheat if I just do this. If JSON string, stop that. I guess we would just do this. Say if JSON string dot length is less than 2. Well, no, is greater than 2. Then we'll start parsing. If the JSON string is 2 or less, then that means it can't possibly be a valid JSON object with anything in it. So we might as well not bother parsing. We should just go ahead and say return that. So actually what I'm going to do is say is less than or equal to 2, and then I'm just going to say immediately here return JSON. I'm not going to worry about that. Okay. I was going to wrap that as a long if statement, but then that would indent everything way more than it needs to do. So I'm just going to leave it like that. Okay, and I will comment these as I'm coding this, so it should be a little bit easier for me to understand what's going on if I ever come back to this, and it should also be a little bit easier for anyone else to read through if I ever give this to anyone else. Not that it matters, because I'm coding this entire thing pretty much on air, so not like it's secret. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and say return an empty object. Well, actually, I guess I'd say the string has less than 3 chars, so it can only be invalid or an empty JSON object. Okay, so if we get past that check, then we can get into the actual parsing of this, which is where we're going to get into more fun. And so that means that we are essentially going to want to, I don't want to, so there's going to be a lot of things that I'm going to try to avoid strings as much as possible, because as soon as you declare a string, that string is in memory and that's just eating performance. So ideally, I will be able to not really have to create strings all the time. That is one of the things that my previous parser did. Now, granted, it did try to use string builders, which is a method of kind of having strings without creating immutable objects all the time, but it's not necessarily an easy way to do things. So probably what we're going to need to do here is we're going to say int index is equal to 0. All right. Now, well, no. Nope. Probably what I want to do is say index should be the first non-white space, non-open brace to start, because this is going to be the char index that we basically loop through the JSON string with. So we don't want it to be 0 because that's pointless. We already have the string and we already know it's going to be a JSON object, because for it to parse a JSON string, it has to be a JSON object, or it has to be wrapped in JSON braces, which are indicative of a JSON object. So that means we want to get the first index of a non-white space. Geez, we're just going to do this. While index is equal to 0. Sorry about that. We'll say if JSON string of index does not equal, well, actually here, dot, it's going to be this char dot is white space. So we're going to do that. So we want if not char dot is white space. I guess I could probably set this to be 1 by default. And I guess that's all we really need, because there's no way it could be valid JSON otherwise. So we're going to go ahead and say while it's not white space, then we'll say index is equal to, yeah, that I guess we do have to do that then. Index is equal to, shoot, that will constantly do that. So I guess we don't want to do a for loop there. We're going to have to do or I don't want to do a while loop there. I'm going to have to do a for loop. So I'm going to say for int I equals 0, I is less than JSON string dot length I plus plus, We're going to come back here if JSON string of I suppose we could make that 1 by default. And we might as well make that 1 by default. And then we can say index is equal to I, and then we will break out of that. So we're going to say find the first non-white space char past initial. Find the index of the first non-white space char past the initial open brace. Okay, and that's pretty much all we care about. So that's going to give us our first value. So from there, we have to basically handle a tenuous relationship with values and then, keys and then their values. So this index is going to be the initial index for the first value that we would have in JSON. So that means we're going to want to, I think, let's see, what's the best way to handle this? Also, I apologize in advance. I'm going to be doing a lot of like humming and hawing throughout today as I try to basically do this in a more elegant way than I did before, but probably get disappointed and end up doing it similarly to how I did it before. So we're going to go ahead and say, what I want to do here. We have our initial index, so now I need to basically handle my value. So I'm just going to go ahead and say, I don't want to do that. So we're going to do a string builder key is equal to new string builder. We'll do that. And then string builder value is equal to new string builder. We're going to do that. And then I'm going to just go ahead and, oh boy. So I probably should pull up an example of valid JSON real quick. I mean, the stuff I have is there, but I can't really keep going back and forth to Unity. So let's just take a look at this for JSON. Probably JSON objects would be fine. So you can see here that keys are indicated by quotation marks left of a colon, and then values are indicated as pretty much anything to the right of a colon until you reach a comma. Although keep in mind that if you are parsing a string, strings can contain commas, so you need to make sure that your quotes are properly open and closed, as you would expect. Okay, so that means we're going to go ahead and let's pop back here. We're going to say technically a key could contain a quotation mark, which means that you basically want to do this. Wait, int. Oh man, this is going to be very cumbersome. Quote count is equal to 0. Actually, we're just going to go ahead and say 1. And then I'm going to say while quote count is greater than 0, we're going to loop through here. And we're actually going to go ahead and say is equal to I plus 1. And then we're going to say string builder will start with that, which is, of course, an incapacity, which means I have to do this. Okay. So I have an escaped string here on my key, and that is because by default it's going to contain that to start. However, I actually don't want it to do that, which means that I don't want that. So we're going to say plus 1. We're going to have a quote count is equal to 1. While quote count is greater than 0, we're going to say key dot append JSON string of index, and then we'll say index plus plus, and then I will go ahead and say if, oh boy, this is going to be fun. So I want to say if JSON string of index is equal to this and JSON string of index minus 1 does not equal, can you do that for me? Nope. So it's that, which itself is a double escape. Okay. So if it's not an escaped string, that's when we want to consider it valid. So we're going to go ahead and say quote count minus minus. And if it is, oof, currently trying to think. So I want to say if quote count is equal to 0, just 0. We'll say break there. Okay. And except for the fact that I do want to still do an index. Ugh. Gross. Say index plus plus, which makes this more of an else statement, honestly. Not that it matters, but okay, so that gets us our first key, and then from there we're going to need to get our first value. So we're going to want to, after that, say, yeah, here's where it gets fun. So we need to basically iterate until we are, let's go ahead and do this. While JSON string of index, and that means we're going to do this, char.is white space. Do this. Let's go ahead and say or JSON string of index is equal to a colon. We're just going to say index plus plus. We don't really care. We're basically just going until we get to our next value. And here is where things get to be fun. Yes. Okay. So next we need to basically determine what our value is. So we're going to say, let's see here, switch. Nope, can't do a switch statement because I have different criteria. So I need to basically go in order. We're going to say if JSON string of index is equal to an open brace, then we're going to do that. Else if JSON string of index is equal to an open bracket, then we're going to do that. Else if JSON string of index is equal to our quotation mark. So that's our strings. Then we have else if JSON string of index is equal to, here's where it gets to be fun. So if it's, I'm going to sneeze real quick. Excuse me. So numbers can't actually just be parsed on numbers alone. Keep in mind that there are two distinct symbols in numbers that are important. One is the negative sign, and one is the period to indicate a, well, not a whole number, a fraction. Not a fraction, it's a decimal. But I'm trying to think of the best way to structure this. So I, all right. I guess what I would do here is say char.isNumber. Can I have, nope, okay. So we're going to say if not char.isNumber and char, I'm sorry, not char, and JSON string of index does not equal that negative sign. That means it's a bool. So bool. Let's go ahead and just comment these for now. String array object, and then else it must be a number. If it's not an object, it's not an array, it's not a string or a bool, has to be a number. I've actually, in the past, how I handled this was I did string then number checks, then bools. But I think it might be better overall if I just do it this way, because it's, I don't know, it seems like these are the descending orders of basically you uniqueness. So let's go ahead and say else must be a number. Except that's not true. Because it could be a null value here. So I need to check that. Crap. Okay. Do a comparison. No equals. Do a string. I can't. Crap. I don't want that to be a problem, but it's probably going to be. Hold on. Char dot equals. Let me see if I can. That's numeric value. Unicode category is control is digit. Oh, I guess that's right. Surrogate symbol is upper is white space. Parse reference equals to lower variance. Crap. Okay. Well, basically, I was hoping I would be able to parse any spelling of the word true or false. However, with this approach, it would assume that a value that is not wrapped in quotation marks, which means it can't be a string. I guess what I could do there is, actually, let's do this. So we're going to say else if JSON string of index is equal to, it should be a lowercase n. This is a null value then. Null. Because if it doesn't have quotation marks, it means it can't be a string. And if it starts with an n, that means it can't be a bool and it can't be a number. So that means that this has to be a null. Okay then. So that tells us basically what our value is going to be, or rather what type of JSON value it's going to be. So then we have to go through the process of actually creating a string to parse with that. So that means that we're going to want to basically, there are a couple of ways we can do this. One is we can create a bunch of strings, which would suck. But we may end up having to go down that route. I'm not sure if I can keep this just within a single string builder every time. I don't think I can get that to function. Well, in any case, let's go ahead and try to do this piecemeal, although I'm a little concerned with how I'm going to get this to loop through each element currently. Because I'm pretty confident on sub-elements, but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to have trouble with just getting the correct amount of elements in a given parsing function, or parsing call. Why are you making your own JSON parser exactly? I'm making it my own parser because one, Unity has, so I'm using it with a Unity application that I'm developing. Also, by the way, welcome Dead Slate. How are you doing tonight? So Unity, the game engine that I use, does not have a very good built-in JSON parser. It is predicated on parsing out to existing data classes, but it has no way of arbitrarily parsing JSON, so you can't like just get a JSON blob and then like a string and parse that into generic JSON data. You have to parse it into a very specific data class, and that is not really useful to me. I need something that's a little bit more abstract and can be used in a more flexible way. So I have to basically write my own. There are existing JSON parsers out there, but I'm also curious to kind of write my own. And I have the data part done. So I have concepts of like JSON arrays and JSON objects, numbers, null, bool, string, all that. Those are all working, and I've tested those, and those are fine. The parsing is by far the most complicated part of this because it's where most of your performance is going to go and where you need to optimize the most. So I'm actually rewriting, well, not really rewriting, I'm just writing a brand new parser from scratch because I already have a JSON parser, but it's functional. That's all I can really say about it. It's not very fast. It's not good for runtime operations. It's really only good for edit time operations, and it's fine for that. It does that job perfectly. Um, but I would like to rewrite this so that ideally I would be able to use a JSON parser at runtime if I need to. But we'll see if I can get it to be that optimal. So, but yeah, long story short, I have to write my own parser because there's no built-in one for Unity, and well, not in a useful fashion anyway. And I would like to see if I can do it. So, either way, what brings you to my Devstream? I always like to ask new viewers. Let's see. So, I almost lost my train of thought. So we have it parsing to be a null, and okay. So here's where things get sloppy. I'm 90% sure how I handled this before was by having go-to statements, which, ooh, I guess I could use, but I'm not a fan of those. I've, I might not be able to get away from that actually. So, um, well, all right. Let's go ahead and try this then. So we have our JSON string value, and we know that it is an open brace. Then that means that we know it's a well, we know that it's a JSON object. So we can basically just kind of cheat and get to the end of that particular JSON string and then call parse again on it. And that should ensure that it parses correctly. Excuse me. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say int end index is equal to, I guess we'll say 0 for now. And actually, no, we're going to say is equal to index. And then we're just going to say int quote count. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and rename this as open count. It's a generic open indexer I can use. So I'm not going to worry about this. We're just going to say open count is equal to 1. We'll go ahead and say index plus plus because we're going to get past this. Or actually, you know what? No, I don't need to worry about that. So we're going to go ahead and say index plus 1. And now we're basically just going to loop through. So we're going to say while open count is greater than 0, we're going to loop through this. So we're going to say if JSON string of end index is equal to a open brace, we're going to say open count plus plus. Else, if JSON string of n index is equal to a close brace, I'm going to say open count minus minus. And pretty much everything else we don't care about because once we reach this close index, or well, once we reach this close brace with an open count that's 0, that's our string basically. And from there, we're going to go ahead and say else. We don't really care about anything else, but I will say end index plus plus, and then that's pretty much all I need to do, I think, because we're not going to be adding to a particular value here. We'll set that up in a second. I don't think I need to do anything else. I think this should basically sort itself. Oh, and also this is not going to be an else statement. It's just going to be a regular old part of that function. Let's get rid of that. Hit save. Okay, so thinking through all the scenarios in my head, I'm pretty sure this will do what we want. We do an index plus 1 so that we don't get a false open count positive. We're going to start in a value of 1, which makes sense because we would have started on this. Okay, so the trick here then is going to basically be, actually that's pretty simple. I think that might be it. So once we have that, that should create as long as it's valid JSON. Now we do have a problem. If I probably should go ahead and say if end index is greater than string or JSON string dot length as a safety check, we will go ahead and throw an error, debug.log error. This is going to be rough. Go ahead and do that, and then we'll return JSON, like panic, and just kind of return what we have. Error, error parsing. I can't spell. Parsing JSON object. Okay, so with that, once we have our end index finished up, we can basically just say, I think we could just do JSON.add. I guess it would be key.toString followed by parse, and then JSON string dot substring from index to end index. Oh crap. Which I guess is end index minus index. And I think that will parse that correctly. And here's the other fun part about writing a JSON parser. You can't really test it until it's done. In theory, I'm pretty sure this would work, but I don't really have a good way of testing that. So we're going to kind of barrel through and do an initial pass on everything, and then we'll see if they all fall into place. If they do, I will give myself a massive pat on the back and will probably drink myself into a stupor because there's no way that's going to happen. And if it does, it means that something terrible is going to happen to me. All right. So if we have our open bracket, we're basically going to do the exact same thing where we have an end index, and I guess now that I'm looking at it, I can probably just straight up do this. So let's go ahead and set this right here. Okay. You could just use JSON.net. What do you mean? Of course. I was quite stupid when I looked for that. Well, see, I think I'm reasonably sure that this is actually, yeah, so this is exactly what I was talking about. This is a non-arbitrary way of doing it. So this is fine, but you can't use it as a generic JSON blob. Although actually maybe you can. Because like the deserialized object stuff is similar to what Unity does, in the sense that you basically parse the JSON into an existing object class, but you don't really parse it into its own navigable JSON object. Although it looks like they do have that. Either way, I'm still kind of wanting to do my own thing, just because that also gives me some niceties that I can control. Plus, the other reason that I wanted to do it is because, excuse me, I wanted to learn how to use interfaces. Well, not interfaces in general. I've used those before, but specifically, I wanted to learn how to use implementations of iDictionary and iList because I've never really done that before, and I wanted to figure out kind of how to appropriately handle that. And it's already actually been pretty useful because I've already figured out how to do things like I've done basic operator overrides before, like this, but I've never done implicit operator overrides before where I can just straight up set a value to be a class by declaring it, which is pretty cool. So this is partially a learning exercise for me. We all list down here. Welcome back, Garrett. How you doing tonight? But yeah, you're right, Dead Slate. That does actually look like a pretty good library. I didn't realize that it could do straight up generic operations. I could have sworn that they didn't have that. But it totally looks like it does. Eh. Still gonna wear it my own, just out of curiosity. Okay, so back here to our string. We're going to go ahead and manually post this, which means that we want to do, let's see, trying to think. Probably after this, actually, this means I want to do, well, no, that's fine. I can leave that there. And then we're going to come down here at the very end, and we're just going to say index plus equals end index. And I'm pretty sure minus index is what I want to do there. That should get us to the end of that value that we just parsed. And then it'll let us basically loop through if we need to. So I'm going to do a to-do here. To-do if, well, I guess I'll just do that. If JSON string of index is equal to a comma, then we've got to loop around. Can't spell. Loop around for more parsing. Okay. Back up to here. Pretty much we're going to do the exact same thing that we did with JSON string, or I'm sorry, JSON object. So we're going to go ahead and parse this, except we're going to say equal to that, and again, we don't really care because the open counts will take care of that for us. So we're parsing JSON array, and then we're going to go ahead and say, right. And here's where it gets nasty. So we can't call parse here. Instead, what I have to do is I need to have a separate function called like parse JSON array. So we're going to say public JSON array, parse JSON array. And that's got to be static. And we're going to say, crap, I guess it's going to be a string. So I'm going to say string JSON string. We'll go ahead and say JSON array. JSON is equal to new JSON array. Return JSON. Then we'll do something in there. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and say parse JSON array, which I will rename as just parse array. Okay. Making bugs. Well, that doesn't seem like a good thing for you to do. Why are you making bugs? Okay. So that works pretty well. You know, I probably wouldn't really, well, I wonder if I could just pass, no, well, maybe. Instead of creating a new substring, if I could just pass the indexes and the string builder around. Nope, because I still have to at some point just parse it into a string, so, because at some point I have to parse the string builder section to a value that's usable, which requires it becoming a string, basically. Okay, so that's that. Let's go ahead and go down to our string value. We're going to do something similar, except we have to be on the lookout for escaped characters. So we're probably going to go ahead and do this, except you know what, I don't think I can. No, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and copy this. And I'm going to say open count is equal to 1, open count, blah, 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 blah. So we're going to say if it's equal to that. And, right, so here's where things get a little iffy. Because I need to say JSON string of end index minus 1 is equal to so we're going to say and it's not equal to that, then that means we can go ahead and say minus minus. However, oh, sorry, yeah, I don't know why I did that. I'm a terrible programmer. So this should handle any sort of escaping that goes on, essentially. However, we do need to be aware of a JSON key formatted like this. Because that will actually, that would evaluate as false, basically. Which means that I can't simply do this. I also have to do a secondary safety check and do this. Oy. So that should prevent this situation, because this is technically a string that would come out as something like this. This is a key // quote. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. So we can say, oh, this is not an escape char for this. This is an escape char, or this is just a regular char that's been escaped. So we can ignore that. So, bleh, not great. I'm pretty sure that I probably need to do the exact same thing here. And -2. All right. We're going to come back down here, and then we're going to go ahead and say, let's see, come down here. This is a key. We can get rid of this. I'm reasonably sure this will do everything that we want. Then we can go ahead and say IndIndex plus is greater than that. Parsing JSON string. And then at the end here, we're just going to say JSON.add key.toString, and then I can just give it a string value, which is just going to be JSON string dot substring from index. Not substring from index to end index minus index. Okay, so that should add that string. Next. Okay. If it's null, I can safely assume that it's going to have 4 characters. So I can actually kind of skim on the null checks by doing something like this. I can just straight up say index plus equals 4. And then I can simply say JSON.add new, well, hold on. I guess it would be key.toString followed by new JSON null. Pretty straightforward. I unfortunately can't just give it an empty null object because it wouldn't know what to do with that, but this should be pretty simple. So I'm pretty happy with that. Numbers is where, I'm sorry, no, this is a bool now. Numbers are last. So if we're doing a bool, then that also means we can, nope, we can't assume 4. We have to assume either 4 or 5. So if that's the case, then that means that we can assume that it will be either 4 or 5, which means that we can just do this. If JSON string of index, oops, sorry, did that wrong. JSON string of index is equal to T. God, I really hope that you parse lowercase, but you might have to parse uppercase, which sucks. Bah, you know it. You know what? Nah. We're just going to do this. We're just going to say we have our end index set up correctly. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and say while JSON string of end index does not equal a comma, because it's a bool, we know that it won't have commas in it. Then we're just going to go ahead and say end index plus plus. and then we'll say if end index minus index is equal to 5. I believe that's correct. Yeah. So if it's equal to 5, that means that it's false. Otherwise, it's going to be true. So we're just going to go ahead and say json.add key.toString and then false. Else json.add key.toString true. Okay, so that means that we don't have to pay attention to capitalization or anything like that. It can be an arbitrary set of capitalization for true or false, and it will be just determined based on the length. So that's good. Otherwise, actually, no, I'm probably going to do this in reverse. So there's going to be is equal to true, and this will be equal to false. Mostly because if it's not true, it should be false. Not if it's not false, it should be true. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. And again, no, crap. This is not a good solution actually, because what if the bool is the last value? It won't have a comma after it. So I have to be careful on that. I can't assume commas, which I don't think I've done yet, so that's good. So what we want to do is say if it's not equal to comma or yeah, that's probably fine. JSON string, stop that. JSON string of end index or char dot is white space. That, so if it's a white space, which would be a new line, that would come in true. I guess that's what we want, right? No, hold on. Or char dot. Is there a letter? There is. Then let's just do that. That'll be better. So instead of this, we're just going to say while char dot is letter because that's all we care about. I'm reasonably sure. Yeah. Okay. Then we can just do that because if it's a bool, it's going to be a letter until it reaches either a comma, a space, or a what's it called? I guess a brace or a bracket. So a special character. So this should still hold true, and this should still be correct. Okay, now that just leaves our number, which is going to be. So for this, we're going to do something similar. We're going to say while char.isNumber JSON string of end index or char dot. What do we have here? Is punctuation? I only need the 2, so I guess I should say while or char dot. Not that. Man, I don't know what I ate, but it's not agreeing with my stomach. All right. So we're going to go ahead and just say if JSON string of end index is equal to a period, or why on earth are you mad? Oh, that's why, because that's that. Or JSON string of end index is equal to a negative sign. So while any of that is true, it's going to still be parsing the number. So we're going to say end index plus plus. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. So the moment it reaches something that is not a period, a hyphen, or a number, which should encompass all numbers that exist, then we will terminate, and that's the end of it. So we're going to go ahead and say pretty much all we need there is just json.add key.toString, and then followed by our value, which is a number, which is questionable, but this is why I said a new JSON number, and then I can give it actually a string value with a float default value that'll just say 0. Okay. Shoot. If I want it to be an int, I actually have to be smarter than that. Shoot. Frack. I suppose if it's... No, I can just make it a float. If it's an int, it's just going to cast the float to an int anyway. So, and if it's a rounded number that like an int should be, that won't cause any problems. So, don't have to worry about that. Frack? You never heard frack? I'm 90% sure that's Battlestar Galactica. But I remember hearing it from quite a few different pop culture places. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's a slang term from Battlestar Galactica. Anyway, were you just questioning why I was saying frack then? So we're gonna go ahead and say JSON string dot substring from index to end index minus index, and that is all we really need to do for that, followed by 0f. Okay. And then, of course, we need to have a safety check here and say, if end index is greater than or equal to JSON string dot length. We'll go ahead and say we'll break out. Well, actually, we're not even going to do that. We're just going to return JSON. And then we'll say debug.log error. Error parsing JSON number. We're going to go ahead and do this up here as well. Parsing JSON bool. Parsing JSON string. We don't really care about this. No, I don't think it'll really matter much. Okay. I think that's actually everything that I need to do. And then what I can do is come up to here. And then I think I can just do this. So we're going to call this so we're going to come down to here. And then I'm going to go ahead and say, just go to parse key value. And for that, before I do anything else, we're just going to go ahead and say index while JSON string of index is white space equal to how about this? Char is white space. We're going to do that. And otherwise, we're going to go ahead and say index plus plus. We'll say index plus plus. That's all we care about. So we can go ahead and say parse key value. That should properly handle that. Yes, that should be correct. So before we go to parse key value, I'm going to go ahead and say key.clear followed by value.clear, which I'm not actually using, am I? No. Haha! That's cool. So I've basically cut down on an entire object that's being set up since I'm using indexing. That's kind of nice. Which actually makes me think that I can do that with my key. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Cool. That would further make that better. Because then I can just pull substrings instead of constantly making string builders. Wow, that actually is a little bit better. Okay, that means that we're going to come down to here and we're going to say int key index is equal to index, I think. And that means we can come down to here. We don't actually care about this, I don't think. We can come back down to here, comment that, and I can just say nope, we don't care about you. Reasonably sure that that's what we want. Okay. And then at the very end here, I guess I can go ahead and do int key length is equal to 0. And we'll go ahead and just say key length plus plus. And that means instead of calling key.toString, I can just say JSON string dot substring key index key length. I can just do that. So that's pretty nice. So that cuts down on my values that are being adjusted. This is a little bit more cumbersome to code, but it is more performant. And then I don't have to clear it. I'm going to go here. And all of this should basically just be reset, which is good. I'm not sure if I want to move these above because that would, in theory, at least let me initialize them. Probably it should. So let's go ahead and copy these. And we're just going to paste these right there. Let's get rid of this. I'm going to set this to there, set that to there, and set that to there. That way I'm not declaring new ones in scope. Okay. I think we're pretty good. Let's go ahead. I could probably get away with that right here as well. So let's go ahead and copy this. When I come up to here, I'm going to say end index is equal to 0. Then we're going to come back down to here. We're going to say end index is equal to that. Cool. So that keeps everything out of our loop. All right. In theory, that should work. Wow, that is way more elegant than my old one, which probably means it's not going to work. Let's immediately set to breaking this and just horribly maiming it. Okay. Yeah, that I think would do it. So we're not going to have our arrays parse yet, but that's fine. I don't really care. I want to test if our JSON bools and simple data structures will parse first, and then I will test if our more difficult values will parse properly. So we're going to go ahead and do something like this. Let's say string test, and I'm going to do this very simply to start. So I'll say int 0. We'll say 5. So I'm not going to try to like trip anything up. I want to see if I have the base functionality working. Float. We'll say like 6.5. And then no. No. And finally, bool true. Okay. So that is a sneeze coming on. Excuse me. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this. I'm going to turn this to none. Okay. So in theory, I should be able to just hit 0. So close. Well, we almost got there. What about 1? Nope. Okay. So, yeah, that's not working. We get to the end of test, which makes me think that my values are incorrect, which is interesting. interesting. So we get the first one partially parsed and the last one partially parsed. It is incorrect, which means that we've done terrible things. Interesting. So this, I'm assuming, is a structural problem. Nose raised to sneeze event. Okay. I'm mostly curious as to why my middle values are just gone. That's what's interesting, which kind of makes me think that I set up my indexes incorrectly. Because this, I mean, looking it over, that should be valid JSON. So let's go ahead and see what happened. Time to put in all of the debugs. Oh man. Oof. Okay. I probably should put this in there anyway. So we're gonna go ahead and say public static. Yeah, if I could spell static, bool debug JSON. How about this? Debug parsing is equal to false. Actually, we're going to equal it to true by default for now. Okay. So we have all this. So after all of this, we're just going to go ahead and say if debug JSON, debug parsing, we'll say debug.log, except I can't spell at all apparently today. Parsing data 4 plus JSON string.substring from key index to key length. Okay. So that's one debug thing that we can validate. Let's go ahead and say if debug parsing debug.log. Go ahead and just copy that. And we're going to say attempting to parse an object. Probably I'm just going to copy this. Parse an array. We need to parse a string. We need to parse a null. Parse a bool. And finally, to parse a number. Okay. From there, let's review what would have gone wrong here. Well, it's equal to that. There's index plus plus. If it's equal to this. I guess I would want to say that's our array. For our string, I suppose what that means is I would want to increment my index here, because there's no point in having that be here. So we're going to just go ahead and say index plus plus, and then do I assign that to be? Yeah, okay. So I think I want that. That might just solve my problem. So let's try that. All right. Let's give it another shot. Come over here. I'm going to hit parsing data for string, attempting to parse a string, parsing data for nothing, attempting to parse a bool. That is interesting. So it never gets there. Okay, how curious. Parse key value open count is equal to 0. Index key length index. That's all pretty much what you would expect. Find index plus equal index. Okay. Let's go ahead and say. Let's just do a string.format based off of this. Let's go ahead and do that. We're going to say at 2, and that means that this is going to be key index followed by key length. So let's go ahead and double check what that value is. Because it does seem to be, like, it registers that it's trying to parse a bool on the last one, but that could be coincidence. So ah, gross. Okay, so 0. A length of 0 at 25. Let's see, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 1, 2. Okay. So that vaguely seems correct, but it might be pointing at the wrong one. So let's go ahead and stop playing. What is happening? Perhaps. Well, no, key index would be 25, so that means index is 25. Okay. Open count is greater than 0. String index is equal to this. I think I want this to actually be. No. Okay. So this index is assuming that it's not. So an open brace would close that, which is problematic. Yeah, let me. Yep, got to reevaluate that. That's no good. So we can get rid of view at least. So something that I could do here is instead of handling it like this. Nope, that won't work. Yeah. Nope. Hold on, timeout. Yeah, that's not great. I really don't want to have to increment that arbitrarily, but I might have to. So probably what that means is we're going to say index plus plus white space and then we'll go ahead just cheat and do index plus plus. Let's see if that works. That might solve my problem. Because yeah, I think what was happening there is basically we were getting to this int, and that was going to be our first one, and then we had a white space. So we just kind of failed out there until we reached here. Then why didn't we get 5? Well, let's find out. Kind of stabbing into the goop. Wow, that worked out insanely well. For okay. Okay. Well, back to the string real quick. JSON string, blah, blah, blah. We're going to say index plus 1. I think that will properly wrap that. So we got as far as attempting to parse a null. Then we didn't get to a bool, which is interesting. I guess what that means is that I need to come down here. I do add that, right? Yeah. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and say if debug parsing, debug.log, successfully parsed object, JSON object. Okay, let's go ahead and let that go. And actually, you know what? At this point, I might start writing unit tests. Oh God. Oh dear. Unit tests. Oh God. This is the perfect time for me to do it instead of doing it this way. Oh man. Okay. We're probably going to do that. However, I will test this real quick to see if it works. No. Why? How did you get to the end there? Something must have gone wrong. So it looks like everything else parses out as I would expect. It's just that we're skipping the bool here, which I think has got something to do with me skipping ahead with my null or with my index here. Get all the way down to here. Index plus equals index. Ooh. Right. Which for index, I guess I could get around that just by doing this. Index plus equals there, because we should set index to be equal to index plus 1, which means that index plus 4 should be index plus 3. No, it should be 4. No, it should be 3. Okay, let's try that. That would explain why I was freaking out, because it was jumping ahead. Okay, so once we have this very basic stuff parsing, I'm going to start writing unit tests, actually. Bam! All right, let's not be too hasty. Oh, oops. Test 501, 6.573, null, and false. Alrighty then. Cool. So that all seems to be working. Let's go ahead and now's the time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set this to be false by default. Okay, and now we start writing unit tests. So for those who are curious, I'm going to show you how to kind of terribly write unit tests inside of Unity. It is quite awkward. Probably what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just go ahead and say create folder tests. Let's say create. I believe there is a. Not, or is that part of plugin manager or package manager now? I thought there was. Let's see. Processing. Shader graph, tiny mode, collaborate, user reporting. No, I think it's just built in Unity now. But I thought that they had a workflow for this. I must be thinking of something else. Okay. So let's go ahead and close that. We're just going to go ahead and say create. There it is, testing. Test assembly folder, hilarious. Oh, this is going to go so poorly. None of this is doing what I want. Cancel. Okay. Let's delete that. Hilarious. It gave it the exact same name as what I did. Are you kidding me? Sure. Oh, I guess that makes sense. Okay. And then create. I swear there was an assembly definition specifically for well, I guess that's probably what this is, isn't it? Okay. I think I can go ahead and say create playables. I'm not sorry, not playables. Testing C# test script. So this is going to be man, I completely forget what my format is for these JSON string tests. Okay. And then, of course, this means that we want to open up window. I always forget where this is. Test runner. There we go. We're going to go ahead and... okay. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. Okay. So that tells you how long it's been since I've really worked with this. There's a create... What? 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 Okay, there was a create test script, so I guess means I'll do this. Testing. Let's just do that. Let that compile. I know you're going to complain, but give me a second here. Cool. Sure. Right. Let's go ahead and just say create folder editor. Get rid of this. There. Oh, you are just the worst. Cool. So that's not actually useful. Way too many assembly definitions going on here. Let's go ahead and say create, right click, create, testing, test script. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call this JSON string. Well, how about this? JSON Parser tests. Okay. Reload this crazy. Okay, so for this, I don't need Unity tests to be a thing, so I'm going to go ahead and comment this out for now. But I do want to make use of these. Okay, so, and this is also going to be fun because I got to remember how to use the correct assert calls. So we want to call test, which itself has a bunch of things that you can set. So we're going to go ahead and say author. Oh my goodness. Author is equal to, we'll say, Chris Ingerson. Description is equal to that is pretty much, let's see, the expected result I don't care about, and test of is going to be equal to Okay. Right, you're not going to let me do anything because I don't have you referencing the appropriate assembly definition file. Whoopsie. Give me a second and I will get that to work. So I need to come up here. We're going to go ahead and say create assembly definition file. I'm just going to call this sleepyowl.json. Okay. We're going to come back down to here. We're going to add an assembly definition reference to sleepyowl.json. All of that is fine. Let's go ahead and hit apply. Okay. That means that when this goes, I should be able to reload that. Oh, that's going to get rid of all of my stuff, of course. Let's go ahead and come back up here to parser. Let's go back here to JSON Parser tests. There we are. Type of JSON Parser. Is this just supposed to be JSON Parser? Nope. Okay, then why are you... Oh, it's because I'm stupid. Duh. That's why. All right. Test if parser can parse a simple object containing only a JSON string. Okay, so this is just going to be called JSON string parse test. Okay, and all this is going to do is basically, this is going to be fun because I basically have to know what my strings are going to be ahead of time. So I basically want to do string JSON string. Oh man, I don't know why I'm sneezing so much today. Ugh. JSON string is going to be equal to, we'll just do something like this. Oh man, this is going to be terrible. We'll make it a literal string so I can be lazy. You just are no fun. I will say test, and that's to you, fine. So we're going to do this. Test test string. Okay. So all we're going to want to do is just say JSON parser dot parse JSON string, and then we're just going to say dot to formatted string false. So we're going to say assert dot r equal JSON string. So those two things, basically what this should do is just take a JSON string, parse it, and then immediately send it back to being a regular JSON string, and they should be equal. So we'll go ahead and let that compile. Once that finishes compiling, it will show up here. I almost forgot, you can actually set categories. There's like test, what is it? Test of, test fixture, test source, test action. No, it's like category, yeah, and then JSON. So I typically, whenever I'm writing these tests, I try to add or be as granular as possible with my categories, mainly because that means that once you have that, you can... Oh. This is interesting. Oh, that's right, because I have to do this. Create, because it's terrible, assembly definition, tests.editor. I hate this so much. It is a test assemblies thing, And, you know what, nuts to it. Well, no, it's fine. We're going to go ahead and say any platform, deselect all, editor only. It's just going to go ahead and have sleepyhouse.json as the actual thing. Hit apply. Let that go again. And give it a second. There we go. So I don't even need this. It's worthless, basically. Yeah. I know. All right. Anyway, so the reason that I do that is because it lets me categorize things. So if you wanted to sort tests, you could then go to JSON. Typically, what I would do is I would do this as, let's go ahead and reload that, I guess. Oh, cool. Yeah, cool. Yeah, cool. Oh my goodness. Massive headache. Typically, what I try to do is I try to categorize these as a few things. So, like, we'd have data as a general concept, and then actually, what I would probably do here is I would say data general, data, I'm sorry, data JSON, data JSON. Okay, so let's go ahead and let that compile. So the sorting does respect Unity standard pathing for the options. So by adding that slash, you can see that now I have the option to do, data as a submenu, and then I can go into general or JSON. And that's, again, just so that I can try to keep a handle on these things, so that if I ever have to run tests specifically on, say, like my XML parsers and my JSON parsers and all that, then I can basically highlight those specific tests. Also, thank you, Melissa, for the follow. All right, so now I can do this. Okay, so that succeeded. And this is what the description stuff does from our tag. So the test, the name of the function is what's displayed. The author, I think, is not actually used. It might be somewhere, but the description is what's shown. Test of, I'm also not sure really what it's used for. I'm sure it's somewhere, but I've never actually had any reason to look at it. But you can see that the description does show up here as a, unfortunately, unwrapping string here. But because that's a test, now I can just kind of write a bunch of small-scale tests and then flash test them without having to make a scene or do whatever. I can just, click run, basically. So let's write some more tests. So let's write one for, let's see, we're going to say public void JSON. What was my other value that came after that? It wasn't a number, was it? Yeah, it was. Okay. JSON int. How about JSON number int test. Okay. We're going to go ahead and say string. We're just going to copy this. Okay. We're going to make this be test. This is going to be, we'll say 50. Again, that's pretty much all we need to do. Let's go ahead and copy this, paste this in. Now, the downside to using categories and such as attributes means that it is going to clutter things. You don't have to necessarily have these be their own distinct lines, but I like to do my categories like that so that it's instantly obvious what they are. And I also typically go from most generic to most specific. So, and the reason that I do this data/general and data/JSON is obviously because JSON is specifically what this is for, and general is more because you can't flag things as part of that. You have to have like a generic thing that or category that everything can map itself to. It's kind of weird, but that I found is best if you're doing sort of, if you have multiple subgroups, then it's best to have a like main category for that subgroup so that everything in that subgroup can be flagged. Okay, so let's go ahead. It's just a little bit faster to work that way instead of individually basically setting all of those particular values. All right. Anyway, so we're gonna go ahead and say can parse a simple object containing only a JSON number representing an int. Okay. It is of course still a test of all of that. Let's go ahead and come back here. This is all correct. And okay. So let's go ahead and do floats, nulls, and bools while we're down here. So this is number float test. And this is going to be like 100.1, not an F, just 100.1. Same thing. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. Representing a float. Okay, so that's that. Let's go ahead and get to our null. This is JSON null test. Test if the parser can parse a simple object containing only a JSON null. I like to get rid of the spaces between everything, which of course slows me down a little bit here. Here, then we have a JSON bool test, and I believe that's everything after that. So this is just going to say null. This is going to be true. Say test the parser can parse a simple object containing only a JSON bool. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and let that compile. All of those lists should, or all of those functions should show up, and I should be able to run them. And again, if we want to, we can see our particular descriptions here. Let's go ahead and run. JSON bool test did not come back. That's my fault. Shoot, what? Really? Okay, so true does get formatted. Okay, so basically this comes back as that, which is fine, but problematic. Both of those are valid. So that means I need to handle. So I can't just do a pure string check. What could I do there? Well, I don't want to do too lower is equal to not too lower. That would be a bit odd. I suppose I could cheat and do that. But that does work, but also that technically is fudging it. So if we let that compile and then I ran it, it should actually work. But that's also kind of fudging it. Although in both cases it's valid, I suppose. It just means if I'm doing literal string comparisons like that, I have to be more careful. But in any case, so that should handle parsing the basic structures. So I suppose I could just go ahead and... Oh man, it's going to get increasingly difficult to actually test these string values because I have to punch them up myself, which sucks. And then if I want to start doing fancy testing, it gets even more cumbersome. So I might just not focus on that for now. Okay, so this handles basically our basic structures. Now we need to get into more cumbersome ones. Let's go ahead and say, let's copy this. JSON object test tests if the parser can parse an object containing several JSON values. Okay, so for this, we're probably going to want to do. God, it's going to be so cumbersome. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do string test. String value. Then we're going to go ahead and say int test. And that's going to be 6. We're going to say float test, which itself is going to be like 0.564. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and say null test. Let's put a space in there to spice things up. Null followed by, man, this is way too long. 9, we'll say bool test. And we're going to say that's equal to true. Okay, so that should essentially still work. It's just like a larger string. So let's go ahead and run these. Okay, so this failed. Let's see, true, and I did it again. True. Try that again. Yeah, the upper and lowercase true stuff is catching me. I'm not really sure what to do about that. Let's go ahead and run this. There we go. Okay, so that's able to parse an object containing all of those primitive values, but now we're going to have to get into the more cumbersome testing, which is going to be quite nasty. Excuse me. Okay. Also, I actually just realized how I can handle this a little bit better instead of manually typing in the string like this, although that is useful for these simple tests. For more complicated tests, I'll probably just be building the actual value out and then checking it. Okay, so there are a couple of other tests actually that I'll probably shift to real quick. Then again, I don't really have a reason to do that. I was going to, well, let's just do it so I can get them out of the way. So we're going to go ahead and say create testing test script. I'm just going to go ahead and call this JSON bool tests. Okay, let's get rid of this. So I don't have any need for that. We don't need to worry about this. I'm going to go ahead and come over here and grab these because these are going to be the thing. Let's paste this here. JSON in general. Let's go ahead and do this. We're going to say this is equal to type of. Oh yeah, using sleepyowl.common. This is JSON bool. All right, so this is going to be JSON bool. Operator test. Okay, so this is going to be test if a JSON bool can be equated to a true bool value. So this is going to be JSON bool true operator test. We're just going to say assert r equal, which I guess just means new JSON bool true and true. I think that's all I need to do there. And that also means that that should work. Let's go ahead and see if that compiles and runs properly. I also just realized that these are in the namespace tests, which I probably should rename to like sleepyowl.common.tests. Anyway, so you can see that we now have a new script here. If I run that, that should work. Cool. So let's go ahead and I'm going to put these in a different namespace. I'm going to put this in sleepyowl.common.tests. Yeah, we'll just do sleepyowl.tests, I suppose. That would make more sense. Sleepyowl.tests. Okay. Let's go ahead and copy this. We're going to come down here, paste this. We're going to get rid of this and this. It can be equated to a false bool value. False operator test are equal false. False. Let's go ahead and copy down this. False. I guess I'll rename these as equal test. Equal test. And then not equal test. And I should probably rename this like equal false test. Equals true test. Okay. Let's see here. I should probably go ahead and just have this be under, let's see, test can be, evaluated to not equal, can be equated to a false bool value, can be evaluated to not equal a bool value. So we're just going to say are not equal and this. Okay. So let's go ahead and let that compile. So that's going to take care of our 3 basic tests for JSON parser or for JSON bools, which is just to see like if the JSON bool is equal to true, if it's equal to false, or if it's not equal to a bool value that it shouldn't be equal to. So let's go ahead. We're going to have to run all of these because I changed the namespace, but that's all fine. Let's run these. There we go. Okay. So all of those tests come out to be valid. Awesome. So that's pretty much all we needed to do for JSON bools, I believe. I suppose I could do a quick toString check here. So I'll probably do something like this. Let's go ahead and copy this, paste this down here. toString test. Test if a JSON bool can be converted into a string. Into not a, the expected string value. Okay, and all we're going to do is assert r equal. It's going to be JSON bool dot toString. Not that. toString. And then we will just do true.toString, I guess. That should pretty much do what we want. Okay. So we'll let that go. That should essentially, there we go. Cool. So yeah, unit testing is pretty nice once you kind of get into it, but it is a bit of a weird process because obviously you're just writing code to evaluate your existing code. And even with what I do, I'm not entirely sure if I'm effectively using it, admittedly. I've not really worked on a project that has had extensive testing written into it, or well, extensive unit testing anyway. So it's kind of interesting for me to work on this. So I guess another benefit of working on something that I've not really done before. Let's go ahead and we can also simplify our stuff here. Get rid of this. All right, let's go ahead and let that compile. All right. Neat. Haven't tried unit tests in Unity yet. Used to write them on the old job, though. Yeah, I mean it's one of those things where if you have an existing system, there's no real point in writing unit tests. But if you're working on a new system, you might as well write those tests, just because they're great for smoke testing. Like one of the things that I always worry about, if you've seen me work on my JSON parser at all in the past on air for TextQuest, you'll know that every time I do any sort of change, same thing for my regular parser in TextQuest. Anytime I do any sort of change, I get very nervous because I'm not really sure. I don't have a good way to test everything to make sure everything works as expected. And that's what unit tests do. They basically run through a bunch of test scenarios that you've thought of, and then they just validate. They just make sure that everything comes out the way you expect. So it's pretty nice, but it is also something that you put in a lot of upfront effort to get to save a lot of time later on. And again, it's one of those things that, like you said, Garrett, is much more useful for larger sprawling systems than it is for like small things. Which is why it's so hard to get into this mindset, because this is very much a large corporation style approach, right? So we're going to go ahead and say JSON string tests. Especially if it's easy to provide sample input data. Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and open that up. Get rid of this. Get rid of this. Here, using sleepyowl.common. Sleepyowl.tests. All right, we're going to go ahead and come down to here. I'm going to copy this. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and do this. Get rid of you. Come down to here. Come down to here. Come down to here. All right. Hello, Jacob Shrimp. Let's see. Lost track of some of the comments. We started doing automation testing in Manifold Garden, placing the player at specific points and measuring the FPS. Okay. I'd say if many people work on the same code, otherwise I would write tests before doing some major refactoring. Yeah. That's a good approach too. Yeah, if you have multiple people working on a given or on a particular system together, then unit tests are a great way for you to make sure that you don't accidentally like squash someone else's code. So this is going to be JSON string nope. I guess we'll say equals test. We'll go ahead and say test if a JSON string can be converted into the expected string value. Well, how about can be equated to the string value. I think that's good. So we're going to go ahead and say assert dot r equal. Oh, and by the way, when you're writing unit tests, you want to use r equal, not assert dot equals, because that doesn't actually work. And if you try that, it will straight up, I think if you hover over it, it straight up tells you that it throws an invalid operation exception. So you don't want to say dot equals, you want to say dot r equal. That took me a couple of minutes when I was first starting out to learn. So, how are you doing tonight, by the way, Jacob Shrimp? Sorry, I was very rude. I forgot to ask. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and say new JSON string. We'll just go ahead and say test string. So assert that and test string are equal. Okay, we're going to go ahead and copy this. test if can be equated. Can be, what's the opposite of equated? Can be not equated. Can be. So string not equals test. So this is going to be r not equal, and this is going to be test string 1 and test string 2. Can be equated to the expected string value. Can be anti-equate. Not equal. Let's see. Will evaluate as not equal to the expected string value. To a target string value. Okay. Dequated. Okay, and these are also for JSON string, not for JSON bool. Okay, I'm pretty reasonably sure that that's all I really care about. So, yes. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay. So that should handle our JSON string tests. Go ahead and run those. Cool, so that's our JSON string stuff. Let's go ahead and create C# script. Oh, not that, sorry, testing. We're going to call this JSON null tests. Open up. Let's get rid of you. This is why I typically will edit my templates for my scripts, but I haven't done so for the testing. We're going to say using sleepyowl.common. This is going to be under sleepyowl.tests. Not sleep owl, sleepy owl.tests. We're going to go ahead and copy this. Okay, get rid of you because you guys freaking always do that to me. Let's go ahead and paste this in there. Come down here. All right. How are you handling automated testing, by the way, Garrett? I'm curious about that because that's something I've not really looked into it, but I do know that it is something that's complicated. Just because doing any sort of like automated testing in game basically amounts to writing a rudimentary AI almost, which is very cumbersome. Okay, description. This is going to be test if a JSON null can be equated to the expected string value. I guess that's true. I actually don't. Huh. Okay. I don't know what test I can write for null because null is the absence of data. I can't really check if they're equal to null because technically that's not correct. I mean, I could write it. I get. Okay, we might come back to null later. I can't really think of a good one for that because there's not much to JSON null. Like it's. So let's go ahead and say unit tests for the JSON null class. Like there's not much to JSON null. It's basically just null. That's really all it is. Which I guess means that I could do this, I guess. JSON null to string test. And we'll just say assert.r equal new JSON null dot to string then null. That's pretty much all we would do. Can be converted to the expected string value. that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and copy this. I'm going to put this back here for JSON string class. Go back here to JSON bool class. Okay, so let's go ahead and let that compile. We have a ton of debug functions to load levels, no clip spawn cubes. It's all manual though. Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. Although I guess, you could do what I did a long time ago. Well, not really a long time ago. On last year's game jam or train jam. So are you testing the same things every time? I mean, I would assume so because that's the point of testing. But because what you could do if you want to save time is basically write a basic script that will on spawn start ticking up a timer, and then it will register every key press that you do, and then you can once you're done testing, end that, output that to like a text file or something, and then what you can do is you can write a particular behavior to basically run those timestamps and those key presses and just simulate it. But that would require a little bit of a front end workflow for you to kind of figure out how to smooth that system over. But I wrote something like that on last year's train jam for it was 2 train jams ago actually, for a like DDR style game. So instead of manually just writing time codes, I just kind of like wrote a function to do exactly what I told you, where it just had the time code ticking up, and then it would listen for button presses and then log those to a text file that I can then read back in to basically determine how arrows should appear on the screen. Oh man, DDR games are fun to make. They're so easy. Okay, sorry, I lost my train of thought here. C# test script. So this is going to be a JSON number tests script. Okay, let's go ahead and come up to here, get rid of that, get rid of you, get rid of these, say using sleepyowl.common, sleepyowl.tests, and let's go ahead and copy this, move this over to here, for JSON number class, let's copy this, here. We have beta testers doing playthroughs, and outside QA team. Okay. So they're basically just looking for any notable bugs that they can find. Okay, so we're going to say JSON number. Come back here. Oops. All right. So for this, we want to call this JSON something test. I guess this will be int comparison test. That's fine. Okay, so test if. We're just going to go ahead and do this. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Paste this down here. We're going to say float comparison test. How about equals? Yeah, I did it backwards again. Equals float. Okay. Let's go ahead and copy this. Not equals. Not equals float test. Okay. So this is going to say tests if a JSON number can be equated to an int value. Assert are equal new JSON number 5 and 5. Pretty much copy that, paste that in. 5.5f and then 5.5f. Copy that, paste that in there. To a float value. Let's see. Localization bugs, crashes, performance issues, player getting stuck, etc. Yeah, okay. So standard QA playtesting. The real question for there is, are you guys using the data sensation sweeping the nation, getting your JSON values from a spreadsheet on Google? Oh, man. I always feel weird trying to pimp that thing. Like, I legitimately think it's a useful tool, but I don't know. I never got over like the self-consciousness of trying to basically tell someone, buy my book, even though it's free. I don't know why I'm so worried about it. All right, so let's go ahead and copy this. Let's paste this in down here. Can be not equated. Can be equated. Can be. I guess will not be equated to an int value. I guess that's the best way to phrase that. If it will not be equated. Ugh. Da, 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 I'm telling you. Ah, man. God, range support is more difficult, but doable, I suppose. That depends. How often do you guys update data? If it's something that you're doing frequently right now, I could probably sink a little bit of time into it to get that functionality in there for you. But if it's not something that you're really testing right now, I wouldn't. I guess I probably wouldn't worry about it too much. Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay, so for this, we're just going to go ahead and say assert dot are not equal, and then we're just going to say new JSON number 5 and 50. Sure. Let's go ahead and grab that. And then we're going to say 5.5 and then 50.5 f. To a float value. Okay, so all of that should now work. And I guess I might as well write the string ones while I'm in there. JSON number to string int test, and then to string float test, test if a JSON number can be converted into a valid string for its int value. For its float value. Hopefully only one more time before ship. Well, that's good. Let's see here. So this is going to be 5. Let's do 1.toString. Oh, stop that. ToString is going to be equal to 1. I'm hopeful that actually. That's a good question. That might fail. I'm not really sure. I think that will fail, though. I think it's going to output 1.0 instead of 1. Let's find out. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and set this to be like 1.5 and then 1.5f. Oh, sorry, not f, just that. And then dot toString. Stop it. There we go. Okay, so I think that's a bunch of functions for our number tests, which should pretty much do what I would expect. Let's go ahead and run our null tests, number tests. I get the feeling it's going to fail. Ooh, both of those did. Oh, I did it backwards. I want those to be equal. Are equal. Although, yeah, okay, so that did seem to work. I am actually curious. How was I handling that? I guess I can just call toString. All right, yeah, cool. So that handles that for me. All right, let's try that again. Run all that. Nice. Okay, so that pretty much just handles the base data classes. Now that leaves basically all of our cumbersome ones. So we're probably going to leave it there tonight because it's 9:15. So I think the goal for next time is to essentially finish up our parsing for arrays. Once we have that, we can write a few more tests, and then we get into threading, which is scary black magic. So we'll see if I can delve it down into that deep place and retain my sanity. I'm actually pretty sure that it won't be too bad, just based off of the research I've done on it. But I've never done threading, and I've never worked with someone who's done threading before, so I am quite terrified of threading because I'm kind of just stabbing into the dark to try and figure that out. So one more time because I want to see it all. Oh, look at all that. Wonderful. We just ran 19 tests in less than 0.2 of a second, and they all evaluated as true. I will say that is, even though writing unit tests is very cumbersome up front, like just seeing all those check marks fill out in like half a second is really satisfying. Okay, so I think that's a pretty good place to stop for the night. Also, thanks, Garrett. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Yeah, threading I think is going to be challenging just because I've never done threading before. And I don't mean like I've worked with it once or twice in the past, in the distant past, and I'm just not comfortable with it. I mean, I've never done it before, so it will be interesting for me, especially because there might be situations that I want to like run the thread, and because it might be an asynchronous function, which means that I have to be able to like let that go until it's done and then get its value back, which means I'm going to have to figure out how to work with that. So that's going to be interesting for me. But if I get that working with this JSON parser, then that means I have a multi-threaded JSON parser that can handle everything, and it's much more intuitive to use, and it'll just be so delicious. And then of course I'll probably compare it to JSON.net, and then I'll feel sad because theirs will probably run 5 times better than mine. But what are you gonna do? All right, yeah, and Unity's not thread safe, which makes it even more fun because you basically have to like run a separate thread and then wait for the main thread before you can rejoin it. So, excuse me, got the consumption. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good place to stop for the night. We made pretty decent progress. We got all of our, not all, we got a bunch of tests written up, and we have our initial parsing working, which, by the way, I am super excited about how elegant we actually made this parsing situation, because this is parsing is now functioning for JSON objects in about 200 lines of code, I think, and I'm pretty sure my previous parser was 400 lines of code for the parsing function. So maybe 300, and then 100 for the parse array. But that's very nice to me, and also because we're using just int values and doing substrings, it means that we're not constantly resizing a JSON, or not a JSON, a string builder, which is really cool to me, which actually means I can probably get rid of that. And then boom, cool, got rid of a whole namespace. So yeah, like I said, I think that's a pretty good place to stop for the night. So announcements before I forget. Should be back at our expected time on Thursday, Nothing particularly, no schedule hangups as far as I know. Pretty sure I should be good for this weekend. Sorry, I kind of missed last weekend. Last Thursday there was, I had social obligations, and I say that like it was a bad time. It was not. It was fun. Anyway, perf test. Oh, performance test. Oh, that's gonna be fun. Yeah, and I have no idea how to actually judge performance on multi-threaded functions. So, question mark. Let's hope I don't have to like get an external tool for that, because I could totally see that being a thing. Anyway, that's a pretty good place to stop for the night. So as always, I want to thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all next time.